today's session, we look at ARUtils scope box views. Scope boxes are a powerful element within Revit. If you've never used them before, then it's worth looking at them in more detail. You can do things such as link views to a scope box. You can link grids to a scope box. You can link levels to a scope box. What this means is that when you alter the scope box, your views and grids and levels will also be updated. So in this example, we've got a scope box here, and it's been applied to this view on this side. So if we pick the scope box, we can then drag it, and as we do that, you can see that instantly that view's been updated, our grids have been updated, and all of the coordination remains much stronger. Now, if you've already watched the room data and views command, you'll know how that command is able to generate all of the views that you would typically associate to a room, or to, in fact, all the rooms in your project. So it'll create the plans, reflected ceiling plans, all your elevations, 3Ds, schedules, and then put them on a sheet. With the scope box and views command in ARUtils, so on the import export tab we've got scope box views. That command will assist us in creating all of the plans, sections, reflected ceiling plans, 3D views of the overall scope box and each level of the scope box, and it'll also create elevations for that particular scope box. So the advantage of using scope boxes is that it enables you to create some very well-defined areas that can automatically update a lot of your views, since the scope box is locked to those views. The other sorts of things that you want to do when you're creating views to document a scope box area is to have consistency. Consistency of naming, consistency of sheet numbering, consistency of the type of view filters being applied. ARUtils scope box views gives you all of this and ensures that once you have set up the way you like views created for scope boxes, you can easily repeat that process time and again. No issues about how the scope box views are named or the types of filters and view types that are applied to the scope boxes. So as far as documenting a scope box goes, there are two types of views. One type applies to the scope box as a whole. The other applies to levels that pass through that scope box, such as plans and 3Ds. So we can create all of our elevation views for the four sides. We can create overall 3D views for that scope box. We can create sections that slice through that scope box, east, west, north, south. And then with the other type, where we're creating views of all of the levels through that scope box, we can create a plan, reflected ceiling plan, and 3D views of each of those levels. That instantly gives us a set of views that is very descriptive of the scope box and what's in there, and it also has exceptional consistency. No more searching for names or naming protocols for how to name each of these views. Once you've set that up in your template file, you can just use it again and again very quickly and easily, and there's no time wasted looking for names or trying to work out what the name of a view should be. Okay, so let's have a quick look at the scope box views dialog. So we've got three main sections. The two that are most interesting to begin with are probably the scope box views list and the view creation list. So what we're trying to do is for each scope box within our project is to create a set of typical views. So we'll typically have two main types of scope boxes, and these are defined as major and minor. So a major scope box will cover large parts of the building, such as a total floor plate, whereas a minor scope box might cover something like a stair or lift well. So we associate each scope box to a set type. So here we've got main and lower sections of our building, and they're both associated to major, and we've got a stair which we've associated to a minor view set. So over here with our views that we're going to create, we associate those to a particular scope set. So with our major set, we've got sections, plans, reflected ceiling plans, 3D views for each level, an overall 3D view, and elevations of that scope box. And then for our minor, in this case we've elected just to have a plan, sample 3D level views and sample sections. So we're able to define those as a set that we typically use on all our projects, and therefore it's very quick and easy to define a few scope boxes, associate a type to them, and then just run our typical definitions of views that we would normally want to have. So it's probably worth looking first at the view types that we can create as defaults for our project. So over here we can enable those particular views to be created. Now, should be remembered that even if a view definition is enabled, it will only function if the scope box type, set type, matches the scope set type here. So for example, if we run the command, all of these minor view definitions will not be used if we process, for example, the main scope box. Okay, we can give a handy little descriptive name for each view type. So here we've got sample section, sample plan, sample RCP, but could be whatever we want. So the view type, if I just click here, you'll see that we've got plan, RCP, 3D level as opposed to 3D. So 3D level will be a 3D based on the particular levels slicing through that scope box. So we might wind up with 10 of those if our building had 10 stories. We can do area plans, structural plans, elevations, sections, and 3Ds. So with each of these, there will be various view types within our project. So for sections, we've got building section and wall section. So these are the view types that we've got defined relating to sections within the Revit project. So we've got floor plan, ceiling plan, building elevation, so on. So now for the commands where it's relevant, we'll be able to say use the default level settings. So if it's a multi-level command, which it would need to be, we can say just generate all of the views for each level. So with our plans, we say we want a plan at each level. If we wanted to include something like a site plan option, we may in fact say, well, we only want to do that for the roof line level. And so just that roof plan would be placed in a site plan type view. Otherwise it uses all the levels. Where it's not appropriate, we then have just NA for not appropriate. We can set the scale that we want views to be created at. If that's not controlled by settings in the view type. So scale. With a section, we can also specify how many views we want along the building going in the east-west, north-south directions. So by having a view count of 3 for a section, we in fact wind up with 3 north-south sections and 3 east-west sections. With 3D views, so our 3D level and 3D overall, we have the option of creating either 2 or 1 views. So where we use 2 views, we'll have a view both from the southwest corner and another view from the northwest corner looking back. With elevations, we'll always get 4 views. So often we'll want to define how our views are named. So in this case, we want it to pick up the scope box name and add dash section to the end of it. It will automatically then increment A, B, C or 1, 2, 3 at the end of that. And we can define the view name, and we can also define the name as it will appear on the sheet. So those two things can be different, and they're basic parts of Revit. So we have the option of creating a sheet when we create that view, and once again we can set the sheet name, we can set the numbering system to be used. So here we're using GA 400, 200, 500, 300. So sheets will automatically be numbered that, and they will be incremented accordingly. We can also set a particular definition to use a specific title block rather than our default title block that we typically want sheets to use. This might be so that we can have title blocks with or without a north point, or it might be more appropriate to a site plan. So we have those options. Lastly, we can specify that we want family items in our views to be tagged. So we can get our furniture to be tagged. If we click on this, you'll see that we then bring up the tag window, which lets us specify which families we want tagged and what type of tags to be used. We can use a multi-category tag, but otherwise these items will use the default loaded tag for that particular family, and that's just defined using the Revit tagging interface. Now it's worth just spending a bit more time looking at how we in fact name our views and how the view name templates work. Now if you remember, we've got 2 types of fundamental views that we create using this command. One relates to the scope box as a whole, whereas other views relate to the scope box as well as levels within that scope box. So our names are therefore built up out of those 2 different types of situations. So if we look at a section box, we'll see that we basically have a number of settings. So let's see if we go for section scope. So here typically we will name things using scope box name. Now if I go to this drop down, you'll see that we've got scope box name and we have scope box as well. All of these parameters basically relate to levels. Only scope box name relates to the name of the scope box. So scope box is the associated scope box to that level, which might be nothing, whereas scope box name will be the name of the scope box we're using. Hopefully that's not too confusing. If we wanted to do one of the level type things, so let's say RCP level, you'll see here that we now use scope box name dash name, so that will be the level name, and you'll see down here it says foundation because foundation was one of the names of our levels, and then it will add the -RCP. So we'll just go back to picking our section scope and go OK. And that's now saved as a standard definition in our set, and it's also applied that to our view name. The same sorts of things apply to view sheet name. It's all made up by using a combination of the scope box name and levels as appropriate. Okay, so the last thing we should just look at is this creation section. By selecting one or more scope boxes, clicking on Create Views will create the plan and other views for those particular scope boxes. We have the option of updating views, so they can be resized. Hopefully that's not really necessary generally. Open views will leave the views we've created in an open mode. When we're creating sheets, this will just be the sheet views so that we can see the views that we've created. We have the option of numbering elevations or numbering sections. By default, elevations are east, west, north, south, and sections are A, B, C, 1, 2, 3. We have an option of including a distance below the floor level in our 3D floor views. That way we just get a better feeling for what's happening under that particular floor level. By default, only levels which have their building story checkbox set to true will be used in any of the multiple level commands. If you just wanted all levels done, you could tick that, but you're far better off setting your building story checkbox appropriately to your levels. You can then pick your title block and your viewport label. Now, just before we do our final view creation run, it's worth making the point of how important it is to include a couple of variables in your title block family. These parameters enable ARUtils routines to accurately determine how much space there is to place views on a sheet. So we create X border and Y border and X clear and Y clear to fully indicate exactly how much space we have on a sheet and the areas where views can go. So the last thing we need to do is simply pick our stair scope box in this case and hit Create Views. And over on the other screen we have a progress bar indicating the views that are being created. And very shortly we will have a log showing that we've created 3 plans, 6 3Ds and a couple of sections. And we've also then created 2 sheets where all of our views have been placed. So if we exit out of this, we'll see our second sheet, which has 5 3D views, basically looking in different directions of the same level. And we can go down here and bring back the first sheet, and you'll see here we have our sections, our plans, and one of the 3D views. So the order that this occurs in is pretty much hard-coded at present into the zone views command. So you may need to do a bit of dragging around of views from one sheet to the other. So that concludes ARUtils scope box views. Hopefully you've learned something and you can see ways of using it in your workflows. Thank you all.